You're sitting at your desk, staring at your computer screen. The cursor blinks on an unfinished session note, but your mind isn't on the paperwork, it's somewhere else. Back to the moment you first felt the spark. Maybe it was the first time a child reached out and signed more instead of melting down, or when a child who doesn't communicate verbally says mama for the first time and his mother falls to her knees, tears streaming down her face. That was the moment you knew, this is why I do this work. But now the weight of back-to-back sessions, endless paperwork, and difficult conversations has buried that moment under exhaustion. You're working late again, your inbox is full of urgent emails, and the thought creeps in, can I keep doing this? If you've ever felt this way, you're not alone. A study by Gibson et al. 2021 found that nearly 3/4 of BCBAs surveyed had left a previous job, citing factors that workload and lack of support as primary reasons. Many of us entered this field full of passion, only to find ourselves drowning in stress, questioning if we even belong here. But here's the truth. You don't have to choose between doing meaningful work and protecting your well-being. You can love your career again without burning out. This course is about rediscovering what made you fall in love with ABA in the first place. It's about creating a career that fuels you instead of draining you. It's about real strategies backed by research that help you stay engaged, energized, and excited with the work that you do. When I first stepped into the role of a clinical director for a small ABA program within a larger nonprofit organization, I had no idea how much I had to learn. My previous experience had been providing functional support services through a community mental health center, meaning I had never written an ABA treatment plan or even an ABA session note before. I quickly discovered that the documentation I was used to was completely different and nothing compared to what was required in an ABA program. At that time, our program served 26 kids, and I was the only BCBA. 4 treatment plans were already expired, yet we were continuing to provide services for those kids. That meant we were providing over 100 hours per week of direct services and paying staff without being reimbursed. The whole program needed an overhaul. The way the program was run was disheartening. Kids were working in cubicles. There were 3-year-olds behind beige partitions with nothing but cards on the table. Toys were locked away in a storage closet, out of reach from the children who needed them. Parents had little to no involvement in services. They dropped their kids off in the parking lot and picked them up the same way. Stepping into the clinic was something that they just never did. On top of that, BCBA hours weren't being billed, and I had to figure out how to start billing for supervision, parent training, and even assessments, all while learning how to run an ABA program from the ground up. It was overwhelming, but I refused to let that stop me. I read books, took CEU courses, and essentially gave myself a crash course in how to build a sustainable ABA career without burning out. These weren't just theoretical ideas. They were the exact strategies that helped me not only transform that ABA program, but also find a way to love my work without sacrificing my well-being. And that's exactly what I'm going to teach you in this course, how to love your career again without burning out. Now I'm going to share that all with you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Amelia Delphonse. I'm a BCBA, and I co-founded Master ABA with my twin sister, Diana Kelly. Through Master ABA, we help BCBAs gain confidence in their skills so they can have a greater impact with their learners. Our focus is on ethical, compassionate, learner-centered practices. Before we get to the good stuff, let's get a little of the housekeeping out of the way. I know you're all excited to love your careers again, but I also know that you're here for the CEUs. To get those CEUs, you must watch the video all the way to the end. There will be a short quiz and survey at the end of this course in the Mission Accomplished lesson. You must complete the required questions in this form in order to receive your CEU certificate. To answer those questions, you will need the 3 code words I'm going to give you throughout this presentation. You will need to know all 3 of the code words to pass the quiz. The survey questions are not required, but we appreciate your feedback because this helps us improve the courses that we're offering. If you pass the quiz, your certificate will be emailed to you. If you don't receive your certificate, please check your score on the quiz to make sure you passed, and also check your spam folder to see if the certificate landed there before you contact us. If for some reason you miss a step or have any trouble with your certificate, email us at support@masteraba.com. I'm happy to help you with anything that you need. Please pay attention to the code words embedded within the training. I'm going to repeat them, but they will not appear on your screen. So you do need to be listening to the training to make sure that you hear them. Burnout is thrown around a lot in our field right now. You might think that burnout and stress or overwhelm are all the same thing, but they're actually not. Burnout is more than just a rough week or even a rough month. It's a persistent state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion, and it's incredibly common among BCBAs. In fact, a study by Platovo et al. 2018 found that approximately 2 out of every 3 BCBAs reported moderate to high levels of burnout. The study highlighted that lack of support from coworkers and supervisors were significant risk factors leading to low job satisfaction and burnout. Do you remember a time when you woke up feeling excited to start your day? You loved working with your clients, collaborating with your team, and seeing real progress? How about now? Maybe you're finding it harder to get out of bed. Even small tasks might feel overwhelming. The things that used to make you feel fulfilled now might just feel like a burden. Does this sound familiar? If it does, you might be feeling some level of burnout. Burnout exists along a spectrum. It's not an either or situation. It's not that you have burnout or you don't. It exists on a spectrum. Before we go on, I want to give you your first code word. This code word is risk. Write it down so you have it for the quiz one more time. That code word is risk. Stress, burnout, and career misalignment are all different but interrelated feelings that you might experience throughout your career. They all impact how you perceive your role and how you feel on Monday morning when you're facing another long week ahead. Stress is temporary and often linked to specific situations. It might be a challenging case, an upcoming deadline, or a particularly difficult conversation with a parent. Stress is a common part of our role, given the high pressure, high stakes situations we all experience regularly. Stress is a feeling that exists in the context of the situation, but once you're out of that situation, the feeling begins to dissipate. Burnout, on the other hand, is a chronic state where even small tasks feel overwhelming. Your motivation disappears and you start questioning your career. You start to dread activities that you once enjoyed, and it's a persistent feeling that lasts outside of stressful situations, and it can bleed into your sense of overall well-being outside of work hours. Career misalignment happens when your work no longer aligns with your values, interests, or strengths, making you feel disconnected from your work and the field altogether. You separate from your coworkers, question decisions being made by those higher up in the company, and maybe even start to question the direction of the field entirely. Here's the reality. The expectations placed on BCBAs by insurance companies don't always align with the realities of practice. Policies and procedures are often designed by individuals who have never worked in the field. And as a result, the clinical needs of clients can take a backseat to rigid insurance requirements. BCBAs find themselves navigating conflicting expectations, trying to provide high quality care while also meeting documentation demands that often feel excessive and unnecessary. In my experience, I saw this firsthand, how these misaligned expectations created barriers to effective treatment. When I was a clinical director, the majority of our clients were covered by Medicaid, and one managed care organization controlled most of our authorizations. The reviewer assigned to us, her name was Christine, and I will never forget her name, lived across the country in California. and firmly opposed clinic-based ABA services. Despite the fact that our program was designed around this exact model, we were a clinic-based model. Part of that discrepancy is the way the ABA is practiced differently in California than in New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, the clinic model is very common, but in California, most of the services are still being provided in the home. Families that we were serving had actively chosen clinic-based ABA services. Yet every treatment plan we submitted was met with pushback, requiring extensive justification and hours of phone calls because she told me that she would not approve a treatment plan unless it included a plan to transition all services to home. Since I had no intention of actually transitioning services to home, I was not going to include that in my plans, and every plan was met with a phone call. These constant battles weren't just frustrating, they were draining, and they weren't about clinical quality. They were about one BCBA's unsubstantiated opposition to clinic-based services that didn't fit our setting or the needs of our clients. Here's another example. I once worked with a 9-year-old who hadn't had a full bath in nearly 5 years. Our goal was for him to tolerate taking a bath, something critical for his hygiene and his physical safety. Yet after a year and a half of making steady progress towards that exact goal, our treatment plan was denied because tolerating wasn't considered medically necessary. I had to change the wording to accepts a bath just to get the goal approved. It's exhausting to constantly adjust clinically sound treatment plans to fit arbitrary criteria. I don't know what the difference is between tolerating and accepting, but that was important to the person who was approving that specific treatment plan. This is just one of the many ways BCBAs experience misalignment between their clinical expertise and insurance-driven models. The constant need to justify decisions, modify goals, and meet payer expectations, and also navigate ever-changing policies leads to frustration, moral distress, and ultimately burnout. Burnout builds over time, and often we don't notice it's happening until we're deep in it. Some of the most common signs include emotional exhaustion. This might include feeling detached, cynical, or frustrated more often than not. It can include mental fatigue. You might be struggling to focus, feeling overwhelmed by small tasks, or dreading work every day. And you might even experience physical symptoms, including frequent headaches, muscle tension, trouble sleeping, or getting sick more often than is normal for you. Recognizing these signs early is key to making changes before burnout takes hold. And that's exactly what we're going to work on in this course, creating sustainable strategies that allow you to do the work you love without feeling depleted. Burnout is a persistent state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion caused by prolonged stress. So how do we know if we're just stressed or if we're truly burning out? Sometimes it's not so obvious. Burnout creeps in slowly, and before you know it, you're running on empty. That's why I've created a quick burnout self-assessment for you. Take a couple of minutes to answer the questions below if you haven't filled it out already, and you'll get a personalized result with some suggestions for actions that you can take. Plus, specific steps that will help you recharge and regain balance in your career. Whether you're doing great, feeling stuck, or deep in burnout, you're going to walk away with strategies that actually work. Go ahead and pause the video and take the quiz now. It's only going to take you a quick minute to see where you are on the path to burnout. Pause the video now and go ahead and come back in when you're finished. I hope that was helpful for you and you have a little bit more insight into where you are with burnout. As behavior analysts, we break down complex skills into small teachable steps all the time. So I'm going to do that here to create a process that you can use to avoid or reduce burnout. I call this process reset. It includes 5 steps that help you go from overwhelmed and exhausted to feeling confident and in control again. We're going to start by recognizing the warning signs of burnout before it takes over. Then we'll look at how to eliminate unnecessary stressors, set boundaries that actually work, and evaluate if your current job is the right fit for you. Finally, we're going to focus on how to thrive with support because burnout isn't something you fix once and forget about. You need the right systems in place to make sure it doesn't creep back in. This process is simple, but it isn't always easy. Recognizing burnout isn't just about knowing it exists. It's about noticing exactly when, where, and why it happens. Burnout is your body's check engine light. You need to start paying attention to what's happening when those feelings come up for you. It doesn't come out of nowhere, it follows patterns. Maybe you feel it most at a specific time of day, in a particular setting, or after certain tasks. Before we talk about how to fix it, we have to get clear on what's triggering it, just like we do for our clients. This should all feel really familiar to you. It's very similar to the 3-term contingency. So you should be able to do this pretty easily, even though we're talking about covert feelings, internal events, private events, rather than those overt behaviors that we are often focused on. So here's some examples. If you're feeling drained at the end of the day, ask yourself, when did the exhaustion start? Was it after a difficult session? Were you writing a long treatment plan? Was it after an especially tense meeting? If you feel stuck staring at a blank treatment plan, notice, is it the writing itself that feels overwhelming? Or is it something else, like knowing that it's going to take hours to get it done, or about maybe you're worrying about insurance pushback? If you feel emotionally exhausted after a parent meeting, consider, was it because of their expectations? Were you having a difficult conversation? Or were you feeling like you weren't being heard or respected? Right now, don't worry about solutions, just observe and take note. Your first action step is to write down one specific burnout trigger, not just I feel overwhelmed, but exactly when, where burnout hits the hardest. I think it's safe to say that we all experience varying levels of stress and burnout at different points in our careers. In that first role I talked about earlier, I definitely was feeling burnt out. At first, I thought I was just frustrated. Every treatment plan turned into a battle, and every phone call with Christine left me feeling drained. But I told myself it was just part of the job and even tried to view it as a challenge to get her to approve my plans. Then I started noticing something else. I was just frustrated. I wasn't just frustrated after the calls, I was dreading them before they even happened. Even worse, I started dreading the treatment plans themselves. Before I even opened my laptop, I could feel the exhaustion setting in. It wasn't just about the calls anymore. The stress had spread into parts of my work that I used to enjoy. And that's when I realized this wasn't just stress, it was burnout. And I had to start paying attention to where, when, and why it was showing up so that I'd be better able to address it. Studies show that the earlier you identify burnout patterns, the easier it is to stop them before they take over. According to a systematic review of burnout interventions by Westwood et al. 2021, professionals must first recognize and understand their specific burnout triggers before any meaningful change can occur. Researchers emphasize that awareness is what makes interventions, whether individual strategies or organizational changes, more effective. Similarly, a meta-analysis on burnout strategies by Gomez et al. 2020 found that interventions such as mindfulness, stress tracking, and self-reflection are most effective when individuals actively identify their stressors first. In other words, you can't fix what you don't see. If we try to jump straight to solutions without first recognizing when, where, and why burnout is happening, those solutions are not going to be effective. This is why step 1 in the reset process is so important, because when you recognize burnout patterns early, you gain control over them instead of letting them control you. After you've identified burnout patterns, move to step 2, which is eliminating unnecessary stressors. Stress is a part of any job, especially in ABA, but here's the key. Not all stress is actually necessary. Some of it comes from inefficient systems, unclear expectations, or tasks that don't actually contribute to meaningful progress. When we remove or adjust these stressors, we free up mental and emotional energy for the work that truly matters. Think about the tasks that drain you the most. Maybe it's writing session notes, responding to emails, or keeping up with the ever-changing insurance policies. Well, we can't eliminate everything. We can make small but meaningful changes to reduce how they affect us. For example, if session notes feel overwhelming, are you writing them in real time, or are you waiting until the end of the day when you're tired and that just makes everything harder? If endless emails are a stressor, are you checking your inbox all day, or do you set specific times to read and respond to them? If parent communication drains you, are you setting clear boundaries up front to reduce the back and forth messages? Eliminating unnecessary stress isn't about avoiding the hard work. It's about making small strategic changes that reduce mental load and make your workload feel more sustainable. A study by Smith et al. 2022 found that behavior analysts who used structured time management techniques and task prioritization reported significantly lower burnout rates. Your job here is to identify one task, expectation, or habit that adds unnecessary stress to your work. Once you pinpoint it, you can start making small adjustments and reduce its impact. There's space to do this in the downloadable workbook. If you're taking this course for CEUs, you'll have access to that. So go ahead and pause the video and think about that one task, expectation, or habit that might be adding some undue stress. As I mentioned, for me, one of the biggest sources of stress was writing treatment plans, not because I didn't know how to write them, but because I felt the burden of speaking with Christine even before it happened. Every time I sat down to work on one, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I knew I couldn't eliminate treatment plans altogether, but I also knew I couldn't keep approaching them the same way. I needed to find a way to reduce the stress they caused. So I made 3 key changes. First, I used time blocking and the Pomodoro method. Instead of trying to write for hours on end, getting distracted, feeling drained, and pushing things off, I set aside dedicated time blocks where I worked in focused 25-minute sprints with short breaks in between. This kept me engaged and made the process feel more structured. I actually have a time blocking template that I can link for you. It's a Google Sheet, and that can help you structure your tasks to make them feel more manageable. Second, I realized I didn't have to do it alone. I started delegating pieces of the treatment plan to my supervisees. They weren't writing the plan for me, but they were gathering some of the basic information, organizing the data, and preparing supporting documentation. This saved me so much mental energy, allowing me to focus on the clinical decision-making instead of the busy work. And it gave the supervisees some of the much needed practice in writing those treatment plans. We were able to share the workload, and they benefited as much as I did. Finally, I changed how I viewed the process. Instead of seeing treatment plans as an exhausting, never-ending task, I started approaching them like a problem-solving challenge. I added structure to my time and worked collaboratively. I regained a sense of control, and that made a huge difference in how I felt about treatment plans. We can't remove everything that's stressful about our jobs, but we can make small strategic changes that turn burnout triggers into manageable tasks. So think about it. What's one change you could make to reduce the stress that a task drains you? Go ahead and pause the video. Think about this and you can write it down in your workbook, or you can put it in the comments below. Just let me know. Think about it. Burnout doesn't just come from having too much work. It comes from not having enough protected time for yourself. If work spills into every hour of your day, you're not going to have the space you need to recharge. And this brings us to our second code word, which is recharge. Write this down. You're going to need it for the quiz. The second code word is recharge. Step 3 is all about strengthening boundaries that protect your time and energy. And before you think, I don't have control over my schedule, let's break this down into what you actually can control. First, let's redefine boundaries. Boundaries aren't just about saying no to things. They're about protecting your capacity to say yes to what truly matters. A well-set boundary creates structure, predictability, and balance without guilt. Boundaries act as a bridge to allow the right things in while keeping the wrong things out. So here's some examples. If your workday never seems to end, start setting a shutdown ritual at the same time each day. This helps create a mental and physical separation from your work. If parent communication is taking over your nights and weekends, set clear expectations like designated response times. This prevents you from feeling that you're on call 24/7. You might be able to respond quickly in an emergency situation, but let them know that it might take 24 or 48 hours for you to respond to a non-emergency question. If supervisees frequently come to you with questions they could answer themselves, try a simple boundary like try solving it first, then check in with me. That can teach independence while also reducing interruptions on your time. The key to strong boundaries is consistency. If you don't follow through, others are not going to respect your boundaries, the boundaries that you're setting. The boundaries that only exist in theory don't protect your energy. Now, take a minute to identify one boundary that needs reinforcement. Maybe it's limiting after hours emails, protecting your planning time, or setting clear expectations with your team. Even if you think you have strong boundaries, consider how consistent you are at honoring those boundaries. Whatever boundary you could create or strengthen, go ahead and define that now. Pause the video and I'll wait. It's fine. There's room in your workbook, or you can add it in the comments below. For a long time, I believed that being a good BCBA meant being available all of the time. I showed up early, stayed late, answered emails at night, and took paperwork home because I felt like I had to. If a supervisee had a question, I'd stop whatever I was doing to help. If a parent emailed after hours, I felt obligated to respond. If I didn't finish session notes during the day, I'd stay up late doing them at home. At first, I told myself this was just the job and what it required. But over time, I noticed something. The more available I was, the more people expected me to be available. And the more I let work bleed into my personal time, the harder it became to separate myself from it. Then I hit a breaking point. I was exhausted before the day even started. I spent all my energy on everyone else's needs. And by the time I actually had space to do my own work, I had nothing left to give. That's when I knew something had to change. I started setting just one boundary: no more paperwork at home. At first, it felt impossible, especially when we were working on 3-month authorizations. So I was literally doing treatment plans constantly. At first, it was just impossible. There was always more to do, but I really forced myself to leave all of the paperwork at work. I blocked time on my schedule for documentation during my work hours, even if it meant closing my office door for an hour. And you know what? The work got done, and the world didn't actually fall apart when I wasn't part of it. Next, I stopped being at the clinic from open to close every day. I set working hours and actually stuck to them. And then I tackled the hardest one. I stopped answering emails and texts outside of work hours. At first, I worried that parents would feel ignored. I worried that my team would think that I didn't care. But instead, something surprising happened. People started respecting my time more, and I started respecting my own time more too. Setting boundaries wasn't easy at first, but it changed everything. I felt more in control of my work and had more energy for the tasks that actually mattered. I also stopped carrying burnout home with me every night. And the best part was that I actually became a better BCBA because when I protected my time, I had more to give during the hours I was actually working. A study by Smith et al. 2022 found that professionals who consistently overcommit, whether by attending meetings outside of work hours or taking on excessive job demands, are at significantly higher risk for burnout. The research emphasizes that setting and enforcing workplace boundaries helps directly mitigate these risk factors. Similarly, a study on coping strategies among healthcare professionals found that setting clear boundaries was strongly associated with lower levels of burnout. And this suggests that boundaries aren't just protecting time. They serve as an essential coping mechanism to maintain well-being in a high stress environment, like an ABA company. The takeaway: boundaries are a necessity for longevity in a field as high stress as ABA. Research confirms that professionals who proactively set and maintain boundaries experience lower burnout, greater job satisfaction, and longer lasting careers. So, if you've ever felt guilty for enforcing a boundary, remind yourself this isn't about working less, it's about sustaining yourself so you can do this job in the long term. Burnout isn't always about doing too much. It's often about doing the wrong things. No amount of self care or boundary setting will fix a job that's fundamentally misaligned with who you are. Step 4 is about getting to the root of the problem. If you've reduced unnecessary stress, set strong boundaries, and still feel exhausted, frustrated, or disconnected from your work, then it's time to ask, is my job the problem? Most people assume that they have two choices. They can stay and suffer, or they can leave and start over. But that's not necessarily true. Career alignment isn't just about whether you like your job, it's about whether your job fits you. To feel truly engaged in your work, your job should align with these three key areas: your strengths. Consider, do you spend most of your time doing work that you're naturally good at, or are you constantly pushing against tasks that drain you? It should also align with your values. Do you believe in the way your company approaches ABA? Do you feel ethically comfortable with your role? And it should align with your long-term goals. Is this job moving you forward with towards the career that you want? Or do you feel stuck with no real growth? So how do you know if misalignment is the issue? Let's break that down. There are three signs of career misalignment. The first is that you might feel disconnected from your work. Maybe you used to love your job, but now you struggle to feel engaged, even when you're working with clients that you really enjoy working with. Second is that your values don't match your workplace culture. Maybe you prioritize ethical, client-centered interventions, but your workplace pushes a compliance-based, insurance-driven approach. And finally, your career growth feels stagnant. You must be in a position where you might be in a position where you're no longer learning, have room for advancement, or you don't see a clear future in your current role. You must be able to see progress towards your long-term career goals. Think about a task, responsibility, or expectation in your current role that causes the most stress. Ask yourself these three questions. Am I struggling because of the workload or because I don't enjoy this type of work? Do I believe in how my company is delivering services, or does it feel misaligned with my ethics? And is this a temporary challenge, or is this a pattern that's not going to change? If these questions make you realize that your burnout isn't about too much work, but about the wrong work, then you might be dealing with career misalignment, not just stress. If your burnout is caused by career misalignment, you have a few options. You can adjust your role. Think about it. Can you shift responsibilities to focus on your strengths? Can you specialize in a different area of ABA that excites you even more than what you're already doing? Maybe you could adjust your environment. Is the company culture, is it a company culture or a leadership issue? Would a different employer align better with your values? And next, consider a career pivot. If ABA isn't fulfilling you anymore, what other roles within or outside of ABA would better match your strengths and your long-term goals? Take a minute to identify one area where your current job feels misaligned. Ask yourself, can I adjust this, or is it time to explore other options? Again, go ahead and just pause the video. It's best to do this as you're going through, and there's space in your workbook to work through all of these questions. For most of my career, I worked in nonprofit settings, even before I got into ABA. I believed in the mission, the client first approach, and the way services were structured. But when I moved to Florida, I couldn't find a nonprofit near where we wanted to live. So I took a position at a large for-profit ABA company instead. In the interview, they promised me everything I wanted to hear: autonomy to run the clinic the way that I wanted, ethical practices, and a culture that prioritized clinicians and clients. But within just a few months, I knew something was deeply misaligned. At first, I told myself it was just a transition period. I dreaded reviewing company reports because they focused more on profit than on client outcomes. I actually became physically sick and couldn't seem to recover. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was part of a system that just didn't align with my values. It wasn't just about stress. It was a fundamental mismatch between what I believed in and what I was being asked to do. And no amount of boundaries, time management, or mindset shifts were going to change that. So after just 6 months, I made the decision to leave. I took a job at a nonprofit much farther away for a lot less money. And it was definitely worth it. That role aligned with my values, and almost immediately I felt relief. I was back in an environment where I could do my best work without feeling conflicted. Studies show that when you value your values, strengths, or your goals don't align with your job, you're far more likely to experience emotional exhaustion and disengagement. According to Travers 2024, engaging in work that conflicts with your core beliefs leads to misalignment burnout, which is marked by chronic stress, reduced job satisfaction, and a sense of detachment from your work. Additionally, the job demand control support model suggests that burnout risk increases when individuals feel they lack control and support in their roles, especially in jobs that don't align with their values. Research by Johnson et al. 2020 confirms that professionals who feel trapped in misaligned roles experience significantly higher stress and lower job satisfaction. The takeaway: career alignment is a critical step in building a sustainable career and preventing burnout. If your work conflicts with your values or long-term goals, no amount of self-care or workload adjustments is going to make that sustainable. So far, we've broken down burnout, set boundaries, and made changes to create a healthier work experience. But here's the truth: Even the best strategies won't last if you don't have the right support system in place. Think about it. How often do you feel like you're navigating the field alone? Maybe you're the only BCBA in the clinic, like I was, or maybe you're the only BCBA in the school district, and you or maybe you're providing home-based services and never see other BCBAs. Maybe you're dealing with tough ethical challenges, but have no one to turn to for guidance. Or maybe you feel disconnected from ABA as a whole, especially given that's all that's going on in the field, just going through the motions without inspiration or growth. Burnout thrives in isolation, but when BCBAs have strong mentorship, peer support, and opportunities to grow, they're more likely to stay engaged, feel fulfilled, and build long-term careers in the field. A real support system isn't just about the number of connections that you have, it's about the right kind of connections. So ask yourself, do I have someone more experienced who can guide me through challenges and help me grow? If not, then maybe you need to seek out some mentorship. Do you have colleagues or a professional community where you can vent problems and feel understood? If not, you might need to find some peer supports. And finally, ask yourself, are you still learning, developing new skills, and staying inspired by your work? If not, you need to consider some professional growth supports. If any of these are missing, it's time to change that. Here's how you can build a professional support system that will ensure you build a sustainable career. You can start by finding a mentor. Seek out a BCBA whose career aligns with your goals. It's always best to find a mentor who has done what you want to do, who has the career that you aspire to. Ask them for guidance on career growth, ethical dilemmas, or skill development. A lot of BCBAs are willing to provide this. Formal mentorship programs or even informal relationships can make a huge difference. Don't be afraid to ask BCBAs that you come into contact with if they would be willing to be a mentor. And then build a peer network. Connect with other BCBAs who understand the field's challenges. Join online communities, professional groups, or local meetups. Engage in discussions and don't just sit back and observe, because I know that can be tempting. I'm an introvert, so I can totally understand somebody who might be just sitting back on the sidelines, but that's not going to help you build your network. You really need to start engaging in those conversations. And then keep learning and growing. Take CEU courses that actually interest and inspire you. I know all of the free CEUs that are out there are tempting, but they often don't provide you with the strategies and skills that you need. So go ahead and make that investment in your future and pay for CEUs that actually will build your skills. And then stay updated on research and best practices and find training opportunities that align with your career goals. This will give you a sense of forward momentum in your career, and that's going to be really important in staving off burnout. So what happens when you don't have the right supports? You might be feeling stuck with no room to grow, but with the right supports, you can feel engaged and you're going to continue learning. Without support, you might feel isolated, like you have no one to turn to for help. But with the right support, you develop a network of peers to lean on. You might experience ethical challenges and feel overwhelmed without support. But with support, you might have guidance from experienced mentors. And without support, you might feel disengaged and you might question your career. But with the right support, you're going to feel a renewed passion and more confidence. Support isn't just helpful, it's necessary for your long-term success and for your ability to maintain a career in ABA. When I started feeling overwhelmed in that first role that I talked about earlier, I knew I needed help, but I didn't know where to find it. There were a lot fewer BCBAs available in New Hampshire at the time, and the online groups that are available now just weren't available. I was dealing with challenges that I had never faced before, and I felt completely alone trying to navigate them. At first, I tried to push through on my own. I thought if I just worked harder, I'd be able to figure it out because that's how I handle a lot of things. But the more I tried to handle everything alone, the more exhausted I became. I knew something had to change. So I took action. I found a mentor, someone who had been where I was and could help me see the path forward. We met regularly, and those conversations gave me clarity, confidence, and a perspective that I wouldn't have been able to find on my own. Next, I committed to learning as much as I could. I attended conferences and I took every CEU I could that was related to the challenges that I was facing at that time. Each one gave me new strategies, new insights, and a renewed sense of control over my work. But one of the biggest things that I did was to build an actual community myself. I looked around and realized that if I was struggling, others probably were too. I couldn't find the kind of supportive space that I needed, so I created it. I surrounded myself with people who understood what I was going through, and together we helped each other grow. Support is essential to longevity in the field. Even if you're not feeling burned out right now, it's still critical. The right people, the right knowledge, and the right community can completely change your experience in this field. So if you're feeling isolated, disconnected, or like you're doing the work alone, you don't have to. Take that first step, find a mentor, invest in your growth, and connect with a community that truly understands what you're going through. A study by Gibson et al. 2021 found that supervision and collegial support significantly decreased burnout and increased job satisfaction among behavior analysts. The study emphasizes that having structured mentorship and guidance serves as a protective factor against professional exhaustion. Another study by Taylor et al. 2022 examined burnout among behavior analysts during times of crisis and found that greater work demands predicted higher exhaustion and disengagement. That shouldn't be surprising. However, psychological flexibility and strong supervisor support helped mitigate burnout, reinforcing the importance of professional relationships. Additionally, research on self-care and job crafting practices among behavior analysts found that those who actively engaged in mentorship and professional development reported higher work engagement and work-life balance. The key takeaway here is that support systems aren't just something that's nice to have. They're necessary, whether through supervision, mentorship, or professional communities. Investing in relationships within the field can make the difference between struggling alone and thriving in your career. Having a strong network is about having a space where you feel safe, valued, and connected. The best support systems don't just help you grow as a clinician, they remind you that you're not alone in this work. You need people who truly get what you're going through. You need a space where you can ask questions without fear of judgment, and you need opportunities to recharge without feeling guilty. I see so many people in different Facebook groups be condemned for asking a simple question. As this has increased, I've also seen more and more people posting anonymously. It used to be that Facebook groups were a good place to connect with other BCBAs, but it's just not a safe place anymore. People are going to stop asking questions and seeking the support and guidance that they need because they're afraid the trolls are going to go after them. That's not the environment that strengthens your network. That's exactly why we built the Master ABA Dojo, to be a safe online community for BCBAs who want real connections with other BCBAs without all of the trolls. A space where you can ask questions, share your fears, and talk about the real challenges of this field without worrying about judgment or criticism. These connections shouldn't be always about work. It's hard to build friendships and real connections when all you talk about are the technical aspects of ABA. That's why we host live events that bring people together, not just for education, but for fun. Some of our events are about learning, of course. We provide those CEU courses, but others are about self-care, and some are just about connecting with other people who truly understand what it's like to do this work. The dojo is a place where you can get CEUs, community, and self-care all in one place. Whether it's through our book club, engaging live events, or just a supportive space to talk, we designed this to be the kind of professional community that makes your work feel more sustainable, not more overwhelming. If you want to check it out, I'm going to share the link below. Come hang out with us and all of the other members. We look forward to getting to know you. Before I became a BCBA, I was put in a leadership position that I wasn't ready for. My supervisor asked me to apply for a team leader role, even though I didn't feel qualified, and I actually wasn't qualified for it. They had to change the requirements of the position so they could give me the job. It was a master's level position, but I was in school to get my master's degree, but I didn't have my degree. I didn't really want the job, but I trusted that they saw something in me, and I do firmly believe that you can't complain about something without being willing to do something to fix it. So I took the position. What I didn't realize at the time was that I would be given zero training, zero guidance, and zero support. I was expected to manage a team without any real preparation. And when we started to see high turnover, my supervisors didn't step in to help. They actually blamed me. They told me that I wasn't providing my team with enough support. But how could I? I was doing everything I knew how to do. I was working long hours, trying to be there for everyone, trying to keep everything from falling apart. But I had no mentor, I had no peer support, and I had no one to turn to when I needed help. I nearly quit, not just the job, but my entire career path. I was so overwhelmed and discouraged that I almost walked away from my coursework to become a BCBA. I felt like I was failing and no one cared enough to help me. But I didn't quit. I dug in and I read everything I could about leadership, and eventually I built the skills and confidence I needed to keep going. And I'm glad I did. That experience shaped the way that I see this field. It made me realize just how many behavior analysts are thrown in positions without the support that they need. And then they're made to feel like it's their fault when they struggle. That's just not okay. And that's exactly why we built the Master ABA Dojo, so that no BCBA has to feel lost and unsupported like I did. So that people have a place to ask questions, to get guidance, to connect with others who just get it, because this work is hard enough without having to do it alone. And if you've ever felt like you're struggling in isolation, I want you to know you don't have to do it alone. As we have seen, burnout isn't caused by one thing, one problem, or with your role, and recovering from it isn't about making one big change and hoping for the best. It's a process, a series of small but powerful adjustments that help you regain control, energy, and passion for your work. That's what the reset process is all about. It's not just a set of tips, it's a structured, intentional way to create a career you can actually sustain. Each step builds on the last, and together they form a system that prevents burnout from creeping back in. These steps aren't meant to be a one-time fix. They work together to create a system that helps you not just recover from burnout, but prevent it from coming back. So now I have one question for you. Where are you in this reset process? Take a moment to reflect on this. Maybe you're still identifying burnout patterns and haven't taken any actions yet. Maybe you've made some changes but still struggle with boundaries. Or maybe you're realizing it's time to make a bigger career shift to get where you truly want to be. Wherever you are, that's okay. The key is knowing what your next step needs to be. And here's the most important part. You don't have to do it alone. Whether it's the dojo or another community, the most important thing is to find a space where you feel valued, where you can ask questions and where you can connect with others who understand what you're going through. Find the right community for you. Reigniting your passion in the field and keeping it high is an ongoing process. That's why I've put together resources to help you track your progress, reflect on your career alignment, and apply what you've learned. First, you can download the workbook if you haven't done that already. It includes exercises and reflection prompts to help you put the reset process into action. You can also you also have access to the career alignment checklist. So if you've ever started wondering whether your job is truly a good fit, you can use it to assess your strengths, values, and your long-term goals. And finally, you can take the burnout quiz anytime. Burnout isn't static. Your score might change as you make adjustments in your career. Keeping track of it over time helps you stay proactive about your well-being. Simply save the link and retake the quiz anytime you want to check in with your level of burnout. These tools aren't just for today, they're here whenever you need them. So you can continue to build a career that fuels you rather than drains you. Making changes, even the necessary ones, isn't always easy. As you walk through the reset process, you're probably going to face some challenges along the way. That's normal. The key is knowing what barriers you might encounter and how to navigate them. Let's talk about some of the most common obstacles that behavior analysts face when trying to recover from burnout and how to get through those. The first barrier might be that you don't have time to make these changes, and I can relate to that. Time is a significant barrier for all of us. It's easy to feel like you're already stretched too thin. But here's the thing, burnout recovery doesn't require huge time-consuming changes all at once. It starts with one small shift. Maybe it's blocking out 30 minutes to work uninterrupted, saying no to one extra task, or setting a limit on after-hours emails. The key is to start small and build from there. Barrier 2 that you might experience is that you feel guilty setting those boundaries. If you're used to saying yes to everything like I do, setting boundaries might feel uncomfortable at first. But remember, boundaries aren't about doing less. They're about protecting your ability to do your job well without sacrificing yourself in the process. A burned out BCBA isn't an effective BCBA. The people you support deserve the best version of you. And that starts with protecting your time and your energy. So don't feel guilty about those boundaries. Another boundary you might encounter is the feeling that your job doesn't support work-life balance. That might be a reality. Some workplaces make burnout harder to avoid than others. If you're in a setting that doesn't respect work-life balance, focus on what you can control. Prioritize tasks, set micro boundaries, or find ways to streamline your workload. But if the culture itself is unsustainable, it might be a sign that career misalignment is at play, and it might be worth exploring some long-term changes. And the final barrier I want to mention is that you might feel that you don't have time, that you don't have a strong support system. If you don't have people in your corner yet, it's time to build that network. Seek out a mentor, join a professional group, or engage with a community of like-minded BCBAs like we offer through the dojo. The more connected you are, the easier it becomes to navigate challenges without feeling isolated. And remember that support isn't just about professional growth. It's about having people who remind you of why you love this work in the first place. Whatever barriers you face, the most important thing is this: don't let them stop you. Adjust, adapt, and keep moving forward, because burnout isn't the end of your career. It's an opportunity to rebuild it in a new way that truly works for you. And before we wrap this up, I want to make sure that you have your final code word. That code word is success. By implementing the reset process, you will experience success. Write this down so you can enter it into the quiz. And that wraps it up for today. I hope you walk away with the tools you need to evaluate your parent training sessions. And that wraps it up for today. I hope you walk away with the tools you need to love your career again. If you're watching this for CEUs, you will need to complete the quiz for this course in the Mission Accomplished lesson. You will need to enter your BCBA number in the form. There's a brief survey in that form. Please take a minute to complete it and let me know what you thought of this course. It helps me improve all of the courses that I'm offering. I'm always looking to make those improvements. And make sure to submit that form that's in the Mission Accomplished lesson. It's a Google form, so you're going to need to click the submit button on the form, not just mark the lesson complete.